Bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum.
Welcome to Everyday Musicality, the podcast in which we discuss all things related to Gordon's music learning theory and how it can help unlock the inner musician that lives inside of all of us. I'm your host, Heather Shouldice, music educator and faculty member for the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. In this episode, we'll continue our second series, which centers around the whole-part-whole learning process that is central to MLT. Today, we'll talk about rhythmic context and run through an overview of a variety of meters. Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Musicality podcast. I hope this finds you well and staying safe and healthy at home. Hopefully, you're finding things to occupy your time and keep you from getting too stir-crazy. One thing I've definitely enjoyed spending time with is the crowdsourced list of recorded music in various tonalities that I started and shared with you last time. It's been a lot of fun to read everyone's additions and listen to some new music, and I hope you've been having fun with it too. Since today's topic is meter, I've also started a crowdsourced list of recorded music in various meters that I've linked to in the show notes. Hopefully after you listen to today's episode, you'll check it out and add to that as well. Before we get into today's topic, I want to remind everyone that this podcast is sponsored by GIA Publications, publisher of many MLT-related materials, including my upcoming book tentatively titled Weaving It All Together, A Practical Guide to Applying Gordon's Music Learning Theory in the Elementary General Music Program. Don't forget that our second giveaway from GIA is a free copy of the book, The Ways Children Learn Music by Eric Bluestein. If you're not familiar with this book, it's a great introduction to MLT and is a quick and fun read. If you already own a copy of this book, you could enter to win a copy to give to a colleague or for your music education library if you're in higher education. Or it might make a great gift for a graduating student teacher. All you need to do to enter is share this podcast on social media and add the hashtags Everyday Musicality Podcast and GIA Publications. You can do this on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Just remember to set the post privacy to public or tag Everyday Musicality Podcast on Facebook so that I'll be able to see it when I search for the hashtags. And now, let's get into today's topic, which is part of our second series looking at the whole-part-whole learning process in MLT. Remember that in episode 5, I talked about whole-part-whole learning, in which the whole refers to musical context and the part refers to musical content. In episode 6, we talked about tonality, which is the basis for tonal context, and I did a quick taste of tonalities in which I gave an overview of the most common tonalities featured in MLT-based instruction. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about meter, which is the basis for rhythmic context, and I'll do a quick menu of meters in which I'll give a rundown of Gordon's approach to classifying meter. Now, right out of the gate, I want to make sure everyone is aware that Gordon's approach to defining meter is different than the traditional approach that we learned in music theory class. That's because the way we classified meter in theory class was typically based on how the music was notated, specifically by looking at the time signature. However, in MLT, we classify meter based on how it's audiated. So in this episode, I'm not going to talk about time signatures or note values because the reality is that notation is arbitrary. We could take the exact same rhythm, the same rhythmic sounds, and notate them in a variety of ways. For example, the pattern ba 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 or do day do day do. That pattern could be notated in 2/4 or 4/4 or cut time or many other possible time signatures. This idea that we can notate the same rhythm in numerous ways is what Gordon calls enrhythmic notation. That's E-N-R-H-Y, enrhythmic notation. Just as we can have enharmonic pitches that sound the same but are notated differently, like D sharp, E flat, and F double flat, we can have enharmonic rhythms that sound the same but can be represented with different note values. Hopefully, we can explore this idea of enharmonic rhythm more in a future episode. For now, the important thing to remember is that in MLT, we classify meter not by how it's notated, but by how it's audiated. So the first step to audiating meter is sensing the pulse or the beat. The majority of Western music, as well as much non-Western music, uses the pulse or beat as the basic organizer of time and rhythm. And the truth is that we don't just feel the beat, we can audiate multiple layers of beat or beat levels. The primary pulse that we feel as the beat is typically either divided into smaller beat units or organized into larger beat groupings. In this way, there can be and typically are multiple levels of beat being felt simultaneously. For example, take the Blue Danube Waltz. Bum ba da da dum, bum 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 bum. 2 levels of beat that you could be feeling in that tune are ch 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 bum ba da da dum, bum 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 bum. And another one would be ch 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 bum ba da da dum, bum 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 bum. In terms of audiation, it is this relationship between different beat levels that guides our sense of meter. According to language developed by Gordon, macrobeat refers to the bigger beat level, and microbeat refers to the smaller beat level. Macrobeat, microbeat. As Gordon defines on page 175 of his 2012 edition of Learning Sequences in Music, microbeats are shorter than macrobeats and are derived from the equal division of macrobeats. So macrobeats, the bigger beat, are primarily responsible for our audiation of tempo, while microbeats, the little beats, are primarily responsible for our audiation of meter. In MLT, rather than attempting to differentiate meter through time signatures or note values, meter is defined in terms of the beat levels you are audiating and how those beat levels relate to one another. So our audiation of meter depends on how we audiate the macrobeats and microbeats in relation to each other. How the macrobeats are divided into microbeats or how the microbeats are grouped into macrobeats. That's what gives us our sense of meter. For this reason, MLT-based instruction most commonly uses a rhythm syllable system that is based on beat function rather than on note value. Once students begin learning to associate syllables to the musical sounds they are performing and audiating, certain syllables can be associated to the macro and micro beats in each meter, which provides a useful tool for learning to discriminate between different meters. Perhaps in a future episode we'll do a deep dive into the different syllable systems that exist, but for this episode I'm just going to use the beat function syllables that were originally developed by Froseth and adapted by Gordon. In this system, the syllable do is used for the macro beat, do, no matter what meter, and then the syllables for the micro beats vary depending on the meter that you're audiating. So now let's do a quick overview of the most common meters used in MLT-based instruction. But first, a quick warning. According to the sequential learning process of MLT, developing audiation in various meters should not begin with theoretical explanations. In episode 3 on sequential music learning, I talked about how music learning and audiation development should start with listening and performing by ear long before reading and writing notation and subsequent theoretical explanations. So the way I'm about to talk about the meters with you is not how I would introduce them to students. However, for the purposes of this episode, and because I'm assuming you have some basic musical knowledge, I'll be giving definitions of the meters. But please do not interpret this to be indicative of how meters would be taught to children, or older students for that matter. We'll talk about that more in future episodes. To help us organize meters, Gordon classifies them into 2 different types. One type is when the macrobeats are even or of equal length. And the other type of meter is when the macrobeats are uneven or are of unequal length. So we have even meters and uneven meters. Now, Gordon referred to those 2 categories of meter as usual and unusual, but I've been starting to come to feel very uncomfortable with those terms. I understand that Gordon chose the terms usual and unusual because we do tend to encounter even meters much more often in the United States than we encounter uneven meters. However, I really don't like that the terms usual meter and unusual meter imply that there's a normal and then there is an other. If you could see me right now, you would see I'm using air quotes around the words normal and other. So I don't like that the terms usual meter and unusual meter imply that certain meters are strange or abnormal. And furthermore, there are parts of the world in which what Gordon called unusual meter is actually the norm. Take, for example, Greece or Bulgaria. You hear lots of music in fives and sevens, and you'll even see people dancing to music in those meters like it's the easiest thing in the world. That's because those meters are common in those areas. There is nothing unusual about them. So, in this episode, you might hear me using Gordon's terms usual meter and unusual meter, but lately I've been making a conscious effort to start calling them even meter and uneven meter. Thanks to Butch Marshall, who first exposed me to the labels even and uneven. Getting back to Gordon's system of classifying meters. So we can categorize meters into even meters and uneven meters. If you were to sway your body side to side to the macro beat, you would spend the same amount of time on each side when you're swaying to even meters, because all the macro beats are the same length. But if you were to sway side to side to the beat in an uneven meter, some sways would be longer and some sways would be shorter, because the macro beats are not all the same length. Now, as we get into the overview of the meters most commonly used in MLT-based instruction, I want to encourage you to move your body. This is because our understanding of rhythm does not come from seeing note values or comparing note values to mathematical ratios like we often are traditionally taught. Seeing notation and talking about music theory do not help us feel rhythm. That's not to say that notation and theory are never important. They most certainly are, but in terms of sequential learning, they should never be the starting place. Side note, I talk more about these ideas in episode 3 on sequential music learning and in episode 4 on common misunderstandings about MLT, so you might want to check out episodes 3 and 4 if you haven't already. In terms of sequential learning, which is one of the core tenets of MLT, before we learn music notation or talk about music theory, we need to first develop audiation. And our rhythmic audiation comes from feeling rhythm in our bodies. Moving to music and experiencing rhythm in the body directly inform our understanding of rhythm. So when you teach beat and rhythm to your students, instead of talking about it, get them moving. Just model movement and encourage them to move like you. So as you're listening to this overview of meters, I highly encourage you to move your body to the macro beat and micro beat. Now let's briefly run through each of the most common meters in MLT-based instruction, starting with the even meters. There are 3 types of even meters: duple, triple, and combined meter. First, let's look at duple meter. Do day do day do. Ya-dum ba-da-dum, ba-dum ba-da-dum, ba-dum ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Do day do day do. In duple meter, the microbeats are do day do day do day do day. So in duple meter, each macrobeat is divided into 2 microbeats of equal length. It doesn't matter what the time signature is because, again, notation is arbitrary. It could be 2-4, 4-4, 2-2, 6-8, so on. It doesn't matter how it's notated. If you're audiating even macrobeats, each divided into 2 microbeats, that's duple meter. Try echoing after me and sway your body side to side. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Now try echoing with syllables this time. Do day do day do. Do day do day do. Do day do do. Now try moving to the macrobeats and microbeats. Sway your body side to side and say do Add the microbeats in your hands. Do-day, 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 do-day. Keep that going while you listen again. Ya-dum-ba-da-dum, ya-dum-ba-da-dum, ya-dum-ba-da-da-da-da, ya-da-da-da-dum. Another common song in duple meter is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Bum ba dum ba dum bum ba dum ba dum bum 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 bum. I'm going to use the A section of that tune as we go through each of the other meters. The next even meter is triple meter. In triple meter, each macrobeat is divided into 3 microbeats of equal length. Again, it doesn't matter what the time signature is. It could be 3/4, 6/8, 2/4. It doesn't matter how it's notated. If you're audiating even macrobeats, each divided into 3 microbeats, that's triple meter. Here's a little tune in triple meter. Do-da-dee-do, do-da-dee-do. Ya-dum-bum-ba-dum-bum-ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum-bum-ba-dum-bum-ba-da-da-da-dum. Do-da-dee-do, do-da-dee-do. So in triple meter, the microbeats are do-da-dee, 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 do-da-dee. Try swaying your body to the macrobeat. Do, 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 do. Now try adding microbeats with your hands. Do-da-dee, 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 do-da-dee. Keep that going and echo after me. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Now try echoing with syllables this time. Do-da-dee-do, do-da-dee-do. Do, do-da-dee, do-da-dee-do. Do-da-dee, do-da-dee-do, do. Now keep moving while you listen to my song again. Ya-dum-bum-ba-dum-bum-ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-dum-bum-ba-dum-bum-ba-da-da-da-dum. Do-da-dee, do-da-dee. So again, each macrobeat divided into 3 microbeats of equal length, is triple meter. If I were to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in triple meter, it might sound something like this. Bum 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 bum. The last even meter is combined meter. In combined meter, some macrobeats are divided into 2 microbeats each, and some macrobeats are divided into 3 microbeats. Again, all of the macrobeats are equal length, even length, but it's now a matter of whether the macrobeats are divided into 2s or 3s. Here's an example. Do-day, do, do-da-dee-do. Bum bum ba-da-da-dum, bum 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 ba-da-da-dum. Bum bum ba-da-da-dum, bum bum ba-da-da-dum, bum bum. Do-day, do, do-da-dee-do. In combined meter, the microbeats switch between do-day and do-da-dee. This might happen in a recurring pattern, like do-day, do-da-dee, do-day, do-da-dee, or it could switch between 2s and 3s at random. For example, the music might be mostly in 3s with a duplet thrown in, or mostly in 2s with a triplet thrown in. The latter happens in the song Little Partridge. Bum, 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 that would be combined meter because there was a triplet, a grouping of 3 microbeats per macrobeat thrown among the duple microbeats. And remember, even macrobeats, that means combined. The macrobeat stayed consistent. It was just the microbeats changing whether each even macrobeat was divided into 2s or 3s. So it doesn't matter whether the switching between 2s and 3s happens in a regular pattern or sporadically. The only thing is that there's a mixing of 2s and 3s, and the macrobeats stay even throughout in combined meter. If the music was in duple for a considerable chunk and then switched to triple for a chunk with no mixing between the 2s and 3s, that would be what Gordon referred to as multimetric. I'm hoping to do a deep dive into that in a future episode. But for now, we'll just leave it at that, and if you want to know more, you can check out Gordon's book, Learning Sequences in Music, or his 2009 book, Rhythm, Contrasting the Implications of Audiation and Notation. I'll link to both of those in the show notes. Before we move on to uneven meters, let's experience combined meter one more time. Sway your body to the macro beat. 2, 2, 2, 2. Bum bum ba da da dum bum 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 ba da da dum bum bum ba da da dum bum bum ya da da dum bum bum. Bum 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 bum. The ending there would be an example of singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in combined meter. Now let's move on to the uneven meters. There are 2 types of uneven meters, uneven paired and uneven unpaired, which Gordon referred to as unusual paired and unusual unpaired. In both of these meters, the macrobeats are uneven, meaning macrobeats are not all of equal length. Some macrobeats are longer and others are shorter. The difference between the terms paired and unpaired refers to whether the groupings of macrobeats are made up of pairs or made up of an odd number of macrobeats. First, let's look at uneven paired meter. Do bobby do bay do bobby do. Yadum bum badum badum bum badum badadum bum badadum. Do bobby do bay do bobby do. In that example of uneven paired meter, the macrobeats occurred in groupings that can be broken down into pairs. Do bobby do bay do bobby do bay. 1, 2, 1, 2. Try moving to macrobeats and microbeats. First try the microbeats and tap 'em with your hands. Do bobby do bay do bobby do bay. Now add the macrobeats swaying in your body. Do bobby do bay do bobby do bay. Keep your body moving, try echoing me. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Yadum bum badum badum bum badum badadum bum badadum. Now I'm going to try singing that song in combined meter where the macrobeats are even. Try swaying to the macrobeats and feeling the difference. Badum bum badum badum bum badum badum bum badum badum bum bum. Now try swaying to the macrobeats again in uneven paired meter. Yadum bum badum badum bum badum badum bum badum badum bum bum. This is not the only way that macrobeats can be grouped into pairs in uneven paired meter. Another possible way is do bay do bobby do bay do bobby. There can also be multiple pairs of macrobeats in the groupings. For example, the song Nishka Banya uses the macrobeat grouping do bay do bay do bay do bobby do bay do bay do bay do bobby. I'll link to a recording of Nishka Banya in the show notes. In case you're wondering, it's notated as 9/8. So no matter how many macrobeats are in the grouping, if there is an even number of macrobeats so that every macrobeat could be paired up with another macrobeat with none left over, that's uneven paired meter. If I wanted to change Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to uneven paired meter, there are a number of different ways I could do it. One might be bum 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 bum. Another way I could sing Twinkle in uneven paired could be bum 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 bum, do-bay do-bay do-ba-bee do-bay 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 do-ba-bee do. So again, as long as every macro beat within the grouping could be put into pairs with none left over, that would be uneven paired meter. In contrast, in uneven unpaired meter, the macrobeats are still uneven, but there is an odd number of macrobeats within the grouping so that the macrobeats cannot be paired without any leftover. If you were to try to pair them up within the grouping, there would always be one macrobeat left without a partner. Do-ba-bee do-bay do, do-ba-bee do-bay do, ba-da-da-dum bum ba-da-da-dum ba-da-da-da-dum bum ba-da-da-dum. Do-ba-bee do-bay do-bay do-ba-bee do-bay do-bay. In that example of uneven unpaired meter, the macrobeats occurred in groupings that included an odd number of macrobeats. Do-ba-bee do-bay do-bay do-ba-bee do-bay do-bay. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Try moving to macrobeats and microbeats. First try the microbeats. Do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay. Now add the macrobeats, swaying in your body. Do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay. Keep your body moving, try echoing me. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. Ya-da-da-dum bum ba-da-da-dum ba-da-da-da-dum bum ba-da-da-dum. This is not the only way that macrobeats can be grouped in uneven, unpaired meter. Another common example is do-bay, do-bay, do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, do-ba-bee. If I were to change Twinkle Twinkle to this version of uneven, unpaired meter, it would sound like this. Bum 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 bum. Another way I could sing it in uneven, unpaired meter could be 2 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2. Bum 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 bum. So again, as long as there is an odd number of macrobeats within the grouping, that would be uneven, unpaired meter. So no matter how many macrobeats are in the grouping, if there is an odd number of macrobeats, that's uneven, unpaired meter. If you're having trouble telling the difference, the main giveaway would be when you try to sway to the macrobeats. In uneven paired meter, if you were to sway your body side to side to the macrobeats, your long versus short swaying pattern would always stay consistent, assuming that the grouping of macrobeats stays consistent within the meter. In uneven unpaired meter, the long versus short sways will switch sides with every grouping. For example, if I were to sway to do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, the longer macrobeat do-ba-bee at the beginning of each grouping will alternate between the left and right sides of my body as I'm swaying. Try that. Do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay. So that gives me a clue that it's uneven, unpaired meter because the longer sways on do-ba-bee changed sides on my body each time through the grouping. If I were to sway to do-ba-bee, do-bay, 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 do-ba-bee, do-bay, 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 do-ba-bee, do-bay, 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 the longer macrobeat would always stay to the same side of my body. Do-ba-bee, do-bay, 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 do-ba-bee, do-bay, do-bay, do-bay. So that would give me a clue that it's uneven paired meter. Okay, those are the meters we use most frequently in MLT-based instruction. Duple, triple, combined, uneven paired, and uneven unpaired. Gordon also described something called intact meter, but we'll save that for a future deep dive episode. Once you start developing your audiation in each of these meters, you might find it fun to start trying to identify the meter of the music you hear in your daily life. You might try to figure out the meter of a song you're listening to, or the theme song of your favorite TV show, or maybe even the theme song for this podcast. If you'd like to start trying to identify the meter of the music you're hearing by ear, but aren't sure how to do it, here are some steps you can take. First, you need to feel the microbeats, the little beats, which should always be of equal length. So start by patting the microbeats. Next, try to move to the macrobeats. Are they even or uneven? If you were to sway to the macrobeat, are all your sways the same length, or do they change? Finally, feel how the macrobeats are divided or grouped. If the macrobeats are even, are they divided into 2 microbeats each, 3 microbeats each, or a mix of 2s and 3s? If the macrobeats are uneven, do they happen in groupings made up of pairs or not? Or in other words, does the grouping of macrobeats include an even or odd number of macrobeats? So let's try it with a recording. First, let's find the microbeats and tap them. Can you find them? There they are. Now find the macrobeat and sway to it. There it is. Does it feel even or uneven? Uneven. Now we have to see if the macrobeats are paired or unpaired. Are there an even or odd number of macrobeats in each grouping? There are an odd number of macrobeats in the groupings, so the theme song for this podcast is an unusual, unpaired meter. In case you're curious, I notate it in 11.8. For the listeners who like to visualize things, I've thrown together a little flowchart to guide you through the process for figuring out the meter you're hearing. I'll link to that in the show notes. But remember, this is not how we would teach students to audiate and recognize the meters, because describing them in terms of counting and numbers would be music theory. I want to re-emphasize that developing audiation in various meters should not begin with theoretical explanations or showing students rhythmic notation. As I discussed in episode 3 on sequential music learning, audiation development should start with listening and moving and making music by ear long before reading and writing notation and later theoretical explanations. So please, please, please don't introduce your students to meters by explaining them or showing the notation. Instead, just sing and chant to your students in the different meters. Teach your students to perform songs and chants in different meters. When you're singing, chanting, or listening, have students move to macrobeats and microbeats. Have them listen to and echo rhythm patterns in the meter on neutral syllables. All of these things will help build your students' audiation in the different meters, which will provide the readiness to learn to label and chant rhythm syllables in the different meters, to learn to read and write rhythms later on, and then much later to learn the theoretical explanations behind the different meters. As you've been listening to this overview of meters, you may have been wondering, why does this matter for my students? Most music they hear is going to be in duple or triple. My answer is that it matters because the broader and richer the musical repertoire to which we expose our students, the better they will learn to audiate. Music learning begins with building a broad musical listening vocabulary from a young age. Just as there is research suggesting that young children who are exposed to more words develop richer vocabularies, exposure to a wide variety of tonalities and meters can help enrich our students' musical vocabularies. Not only does exposure help students learn to audiate in the various meters and increase their future understanding and skill in these meters, but it also helps students better understand and audiate in the more common meters as well. Remember, we learn what something is by learning what it's not. If all students hear is duple meter, they won't develop as rich an understanding of what duple meter is as they would if they were also exposed to music in other meters. For this reason, it's important to expose young children to a variety of meters as early as possible. Finally, Research suggests we actually lose our ability to perceive uneven meters, or whatever the unfamiliar meter is in our culture, as we get older. In addition to this podcast, I also publish a blog through my website, everydaymusicality.com. In this blog, which I call Research to Real Life, I summarize research findings of recent studies related to music education and provide ideas for applying research in the classroom. In one of my recent posts, I summarized a study by Hannon and Treehub. In this study, Hannon and Treehub wanted to see if babies and adults were able to perceive rhythmic abnormalities in both even and uneven meters. For the stimuli, they used examples of Balkan folk music, some of which were in even meters and some in uneven meters. Half of the babies and adults in the study were hearing this Balkan folk music for the first time, and the other half had been given a CD of Balkan folk music and were instructed to play it at home on a daily basis for 2 weeks. When Hannon and Treehub tested both the adults and the babies, they found that the babies who had never been exposed to the Balkan folk music were only able to sense rhythmic abnormalities in even meter, but the babies who had been exposed to Balkan folk music for 2 weeks were able to distinguish rhythms in both even and uneven meters. However, the adults were only able to sense rhythmic abnormalities in even meter, regardless of whether they had been exposed to the Balkan folk music for 2 weeks or not. This finding suggests that we lose our ability to accurately perceive unfamiliar meters as we get older. So it is crucial that infants and young children be exposed to music in a wide variety of meters, both even and uneven, as early as possible. If we expose them to music in a wide variety of meters, we will help preserve their ability to accurately perceive and make sense of rhythms in both even and uneven meters, which will facilitate greater understanding of music in the future, as well as a more accurate sense of rhythm when it comes to performing in those meters. I'll link to the blog in the show notes in case you want to check that out. If you're looking for resources for repertoire in different meters, GIA has some great ones. As I mentioned in the last episode on tonalities, the books Experimental Songs and Chants and Music Play have lots of songs and chants in different tonalities and meters, and Music Play also comes with a CD of all the songs and chants in the book. So it's a great opportunity to learn through your ears, just like we would do with children. Another great resource from GIA are the albums Simple Gifts, Don Gato, and You Are My Sunshine. Each of those 3 albums has 100 recordings of folk songs and other tunes in a variety of tonalities and meters. Each recording is only about a minute long, some of them shorter, and each features a woodwind, brass, string, or percussion instrument. So they're great for introducing timbres of various instruments. If I'm remembering correctly, Don Gato is all stringed instruments, Simple Gifts is winds and percussion, and You Are My Sunshine is winds, percussion, and strings. Those also are now available to download as MP3s in addition to CD from GIA. Finally, I have started a crowdsourced list of recorded music in various meters. I've gotten it started with a list of around 10 to 15 recordings, which anyone with the link can view and add to. I'll put the link in the show notes. Please feel free to add your own favorite recordings in different meters to this list. So that's it for today's episode on meters. I'm hoping to do some future musicianship episodes that will be aimed to help you develop your audiation and musicianship skills in each of the various meters, so stay tuned for that. In the more immediate future, now that we've had a chance to look at context, both tonal and rhythm, we'll shift to looking at content. Remember that both context and content are essential pieces of the whole part whole learning process that is at the heart of MLT. The whole refers to context, tonality and meter, while the part refers to content, tonal patterns and rhythm patterns. So in the next episode, we'll focus on tonal patterns and rhythm patterns and start digging into the basics of pattern instruction. Finally, don't forget to enter the giveaway to win a free copy of Eric Bluestein's The Ways Children Learn Music. If you already own a copy, you could give it to a colleague, or it would make a great gift for a student teacher. To enter, just share this podcast on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and add the hashtags Everyday Musicality Podcast and GIA Publications. You could share the podcast from Apple Podcasts, you could share the website, you could share the Facebook page, it doesn't matter. I'll be announcing the winner on May 12th, so you have until May 5th to enter. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please get in touch. You can email me or send me a voice memo at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and let's keep musicking every day. Good job.